you can attend. So thank you very much to these hardworking individuals and to the whole Ambassador Council.
Thank you, Karen. And now it's my pleasure to bring up and introduce your president and CEO, Ms. Paula White. And right now, I'd like to give Paula and her staff a big round of applause for all the events that they put on, for all the ways that they work hard to serve you, our membership. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, MJ. We have told you that the president of the Texas Association of Business, Mr. Bill Hammond, would be with us today, and something has come up, a little thing the governor called, and so he had to go to that meeting. And then we had another person who was going to come, and the Texas Association of Business office has been struck with the swine flu. So poor Stephen Minick is, we are so grateful for him to take his time out to come and speak to us today in the absence of Bill. Stephen Minick currently holds the position of Vice President of Government Affairs with the Texas Association of Business, where he represents business interests in the areas of environmental regulation and energy policy. He has over 30 years of experience in both the private sector and state government in the natural resource and environmental area. At the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, Stephen served as liaison with the Texas Legislature and as the director of the agency's Intergovernmental Relations Division, with responsibility for the agency's legislative affairs. He's a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and resides in Williamson County. Please help me give a warm chamber welcome to Mr. Stephen Minick.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. Actually, it's a pleasure not to have the swine flu, so I'm sure you appreciate that as much as I do. Bill does send his deep regrets that he is not able to be here. The sad point is that you won't get to hear any of Bill's tired old jokes that he uses at these events. The good news is I can't remember them and don't know any good jokes myself, so we'll skip that on the presentation. What I wanted to do today was kind of give you a perspective on how the Association of Business feels that this past legislative session went, what our successes were, or I would say failures, except I don't really think we had any significant failures this last legislative session. I think it was an enormously successful session for businesses, and I think it's important to say that in the context of our current economic climate and some of the problems that we're going through as businesses, not only in Texas but also in the country as a whole. We have recently, or will recently, publish this report, which is called our results piece, which we do following each legislative session. There are printed copies available. I brought, I think, about 20 or so with me. Feel free to take those if you want. If you go to our website, www.texbiz.org, txbiz.org, you can download this as a PDF version. It has far more detail than I don't have time to cover today in terms of what we feel our successes were in this last legislative session. I think as an overall grade, we would grade this last legislative session as maybe a weak A+ or a strong A. There was only one subject matter area where we felt we didn't have a grade of at least A in terms of results this last session. I think that's a tremendous comment on the mindset of the members who were voting on those measures, including Mr. Miller. Pleased to see you here today. And also just the fact of the hard work of not only our small staff, but also folks like you, because when we had issues that we felt needed to be communicated to members, there were a voter voice mechanism and other communications to chambers and other businesses. Obviously, those things were very, very successful. We could easily tell that by looking at how well informed the members were as they voted on issues and how the grassroots efforts to communicate with them worked very well. This was a very difficult session to grade, however, because for those of you that followed the progress of the session, you know there was one very contentious issue, that was the voter ID bill. And because of efforts to block a vote on that bill, at least on the House floor, there were a lot of bills that never got to a vote. So, quite frankly, the result of the session could have been very different, both from a standpoint of subject matter bills and whether they succeeded or failed, as well as the voting records of individual members. But again, even with that major caveat, we do think this was a very successful session, and we do think there are certain members of the legislature who voted with us often enough and strongly enough to make it that way. Again, Mr. Booter was certainly one of those. I think our voting record that will be published at later this month, a week or so, will reflect that. Just touching on some of the high points without getting into the details at this point. We successfully opposed changes to the state's unemployment compensation criteria as a condition for the receipt of federal economic stimulus money. Very contentious issue. A lot of dialogue back and forth as to the appropriateness of that and whether or not that was a good policy. TAB's position was really never about the money. Our position was that if the federal government is going to condition the return of our own tax dollars to us, that as a precedent, that is untenable. Because while we can have a rational debate about whether changing or tweaking some of our unemployment compensation laws was an appropriate policy thing to do, having set that precedent, we wouldn't know the next time what they were going to ask us to do as a contingency to receive additional money. And like I said, you and I may have a debate about whether including part-time workers in the unemployment compensation pool is appropriate or not. That's a valid policy debate. Our feeling is that debate should be taking place in Austin and not in Washington. It's not the outcome of the debate that is at issue, it's who gets to have the debate. And to us, that was an absolutely critical point that we were, quite frankly, not willing to give on. Because who knows what issue the next time they're going to ask us to change our laws to reflect in order to get our own money back. Next time it could be something much, much more onerous and much more untenable than simply tweaking our unemployment compensation laws. The legislature increased the franchise tax exemption for small businesses from $300,000 to $1 million. Certainly given the current economic circumstances and the hard time that small businesses have, not only in getting started, but showing profitability for the first couple of years while they try to make a go of it, that change we felt was absolutely critical in terms of being able to sustain small businesses in this state. Despite numerous efforts, we don't think we lost any significant ground in terms of lawsuit reforms, tort reform issues in this state. We also expanded the scope of the Texas Economic Development Act to include school districts that can now offer tax incentives to get businesses to develop and provide more economic opportunities in the state of Texas. And one of the key issues for TAB this last session was the fact that we increased public school accountability measures. When we look at where we're headed in this state as a result of the employability and the educational capability of our students coming out of high school, that is an absolutely essential measure. Further in the education area, the legislature passed a measure that authorizes the use of textbook funds for electronic media. And when I first heard about this, of course I don't work on education issues, so a lot of this is just my paying attention in staff meetings, but it seemed strange to me that the way the law was written and the way it defined a textbook, you couldn't use textbook funds for something that was in an automated format that might much more cost effectively and much more creatively apply learning materials to students. So that is a very important change. The legislature also eliminated grading policies that, in our opinion, do not adequately reflect the progress of students. It is very easy and very understandable. I'm married to a wife that taught public school for 34 years, so I have lived and breathed this in one form or another. It's very easy to fall into the trap of wanting to support children and promote them so that they don't have the stigma of failure in our schools. But the fact is, the downside of that is much, much greater if they go through the grades and haven't learned and can't keep up with the kids who are their peers and who are around them. Far better at an early point to grade them appropriately, convey to them and their parents where they actually stand, and hopefully they can get caught up when they can. We also enacted additional opportunities for more Tier 1 research universities at the higher education level. We are far behind some of the other states, particularly California, in terms of the Tier 1 research facilities that we have in the state of Texas. And expanding that opportunity is going to bring more research and development dollars, more qualified faculty, and more qualified students to the state of Texas. Clearly there is evidence that provides a significant economic benefit when you can bring those research dollars to the state. The area that I lobby the legislature on is environment, energy, and natural resources. If you've been following what's happening in Washington and also at the state level, it's very obvious that it's becoming increasingly